and also might drop a few bombshells on you that might surprise some of you. Here we are, another original video, and I think I've got a bit of a structure. So tickle me this. So what I'm thinking, I'm going to do today an exercise tier list for the shoulders. So basically I'm going to go through some really popular shoulder movements and give my opinion on whether I think they're a pretty effective movement or not. And maybe just speak about why I think they're effective or why they might not be effective, all that good stuff. And then next week, we're going to do another TFNL growth guide video where I speak about creating an effective shoulder workout and how you can essentially program certain movements for your shoulder development. It's a bloody good plan if you ask me. So tier list one week, followed by a growth guide for the relevant muscle group the next week. We're laughing. I'm going to try and make this video a bit shorter because the next video will inevitably be a lot longer because I will waffle on about lots of things that hopefully you care about, but if you don't, I do. But before we crack on with the video, we're going to do the bits and bobs that need to be done very quickly. If you do like this style of original content and you want to see more of it, please do consider dropping a like on the video because 1,300 likes in the first 24 hours is the goal, so if we reach that, that'd be bloody amazing. If you haven't already, please do consider clicking the red button down below to subscribe to the channel and maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week. And if you're not going to subscribe for me, I completely understand that. In fact, I wouldn't even blame you, but maybe consider subscribing for the Hello Kitty t-shirt. Oh yes, I am fashion. And at the end of the video, I do comment question of the week. So if you have a question you want me to answer at the end of the next video, please do consider drop it down below in the comment section and I shall do so. But now it's hat time, then it's video time. I'm going to be honest with you, going with the theme of hats that are too small for my head, I have tried and I have failed. Under no circumstances will this fit on my head, but I did give it a good go. So this was actually quite a requested video. A lot of people said, Harry, you should do a tier list video for certain exercises per muscle group. I said, you know what, that's a fantastic idea. And here we are. And then obviously we can mix it with the growth guide as well, so we can continue that series. So much information coming your way. It's actually, it bamboozles me too. Honestly, it really does. I've chosen 15 very popular shoulder movements. Obviously, I have not chosen every shoulder movement in the world because I don't think you want to be here for all of that. But we've chosen some big ones and some very popular ones and some ones I feel like a lot of questions may be asked about. So I thought they'd be quite necessary to bring up. We have categories. Obviously, we have the source, which is the top tier, like really effective movements, things I absolutely love, and consider putting a variation of them in my program, probably at all times. We've got jazzy, very good movements, love to see it. We've got a moderate tickle. It's a solid movement, but it's not probably one of my favourites, kind of in the middle. We've got iffy, which is a movement that, yeah, it probably has a time and a place, but not a movement I would love. And then you've got do not go gentle, which are movements that I personally probably wouldn't program for my goals, but again, you may program them for your goals. It really does depend. None of these I consider to be bad movements. I just consider some movements to be better than others. And this video is very much focusing on the development of muscles, so building the shoulder muscles here. We're not going to look at the traps or anything like that. We're going to look at the anterior delt, the side delt, and the posterior delt, so the rear delt, as those are the three primary kind of heads of the shoulders or of the deltoids. And then, like I said, the big focus is going to be deltoids, so shoulder hypertrophy. Number one, this is actually meant to be an Arnold press, but you probably can't see it as much of an Arnold press, but it is. And obviously an Arnold press is when you start like this, I mentioned in the video recently, and go rotate round and shoulder press. Again, this does not mean it's a bad movement whatsoever. It's just a movement I wouldn't program myself. I'm gonna plop it down and do not go gentle. And I did speak about this recently, how essentially the Arnold press does not change how the anterior delts are working. The only thing it does do is reduce how much weight you can lift comparatively to a dumbbell shoulder press, a standard one, in most cases, therefore reducing the effectiveness of that movement. So it doesn't really have much of a place for hypertrophy, but if you enjoy it and that movement aligns with your goals, then of course it probably has a place in your program. It really does depend on whether you enjoy the movement and whether you're going to stick to the movement and whether it aligns with your goals, because that is very important and that's also commonly overlooked. The behind the neck shoulder press. So obviously with the barbell, we see a lot of people pressing behind their neck. I feel like I don't even need to justify it. Behind the neck shoulder presses does a few things which I don't necessarily think are great. So it forces you into this position, so you're pressing out here, and we know to best target the anterior delt, so the front of the shoulders here, you want to be pressing at about 45 degrees, which isn't going to be possible if you're trying to press behind the head, but also doesn't put you in a particularly good position. Like pressing back here is not very favourable for the shoulders when considering shoulder health, nor is it favourable when considering power output. So for that reason, I wouldn't deem it to be a very good movement. It's not a movement I'd probably include in my program personally. The standing military press, so the standing barbell shoulder press. And I've put it down here in iffy for a couple of reasons. I think it has more of a functional place, I would definitely say, but remember the big focus of this video is hypertrophy, so the building of muscle. And a couple of things you'll consider when you're doing any standing or any first of barbell variation is that may limit your ability to press at 45 degrees, because obviously to press at 45 degrees the bar would have to be out here, probably quite far in front of you, therefore you're not going to be producing a lot of power when the weight's quite far away from you, you want it quite close, and also the fact that you are standing. Therefore you have other variables and limitations that could prevent you from taking the target musculature, so the anterior delts, to failure. So for example, when you're standing doing like an overhead press, or maybe even a push press where you would incorporate a lot more leg drive, you have other considerations of what might fail before your shoulders do. And one of the big considerations there could be your core. So your core region may give out, and that stability may give out before your shoulders do. Therefore, it's probably not one of the best movements you could do for shoulder pressing and like anterior delt development. And comparatively to things like the Arnold press and like the behind the back shoulder press, is probably a lot better. And to be honest, the landmine press, which is this one, is a very similar situation. Because of the position you're in, there are a lot of factors that may prevent you from taking the shoulders to failure effectively. So you've got your core as a consideration here. The obliques are obviously going to come in due to any potential like leanings and rotation that might occur. There's a lot of things happening here, and also maybe the gripping of the weight as well, because you're using that thick handle. Therefore, you may not be particularly stable with it. Lots of considerations there. So again, like the landmine press where you're pressing either like this or like this, for hypertrophy, I probably wouldn't align with it. But I do think for more sport-specific purposes and maybe functional benefit, they have much more of a place, 100%. The dumbbell shoulder press, I'm going straight to the source. I say arguably any kind of shoulder press variation that allows you to one, converge, and also press in at 45 degrees, I fully back it. So be that dumbbell shoulder press, be that a machine shoulder press, anything along those lines that allows you to press in like so, love to see it. And that's probably going to be a go-to that would always feature in my shoulder programming. And the next one is going to be a bit of an interesting one, because as you can tell, I'm kind of like sectioning this to anterior delts first, which is where the most of the load is going, then the side delts, and then the posterior delts. We're kind of doing sections here. And the next one's going to be a dumbbell front raise. So we've seen these in like Lily Sabary's videos where she's obviously got the dumbbell, she's front raising up like so. And the reason I'm going to put in iffy is because there's an alternative which is much better. It's not a bad movement, but by any means, when compared to alternatives, it's not particularly great. And that's largely due to the line of force and the kind of resistance profile. You very much have to go up, down like so. Whereas if you were to implement like a cable variation, you can actually target the musculature, so the front delts, in different positions, so shortened, lengthened, etc., based on how far away from the cable you are, and other bits and bobs like that. It's much better, and I'll show you exactly what I mean, so that kind of answers the next question. As a front delt movement, I would put it as jazzy, and the reason I put it as jazzy is because in all honesty, riddle me this, I think if you're doing sufficient chest pressing movements and shoulder pressing work, personally I wouldn't target anterior delts specifically via isolation movements. I personally likely wouldn't include any kind of front raise variations into my program, because your anterior delts get worked so heavily when you're doing chest presses, when you're doing chest flies, when you're doing dumbbell shoulder press, all those bits and bobs, they're just getting absolutely hammered. So I think a shoulder press is sufficient for anterior delt work, and although this is certainly a good variation for the anterior delts, I just don't think for a lot of people it's particularly necessary. And a cable front raise looks like this. And this is talk about how you can load different positions. So the shortened position, as you can see, Ryan is very close to the cable machine here. Therefore, the majority of the tension is going to be in that shortened position, and the shortened position is towards the end of the range of motion, so towards the top. And you see how he's coming out and across. He's not just going directly in front of him, and he's taking it through that full range of motion as well. Whereas the length of position, you stand further away, therefore more of the tension is being placed at the bottom position, and it's kind of easy off as you come up. Same sort of thing, he's coming across the body, so converging slightly, and he's going through that full range of motion. So again, although like I said I probably wouldn't include anterior delt work directly via front raises, I do think if you are going to, a cable is probably better than a dumbbell. Dumbbell side raises, I'm going to say they're probably pretty jazzy actually. So obviously a dumbbell side raise, I've kind of covered this a few times. The big thing you want to be focused on here is working that scapular plane. So instead of side raising to literally to the side, you want to be side raising to about 30 to 45 degrees in front of you. I've covered this a few times with Ryan Dewars, there'll probably be a video on screen doing now, where you've got that slight forward lean and you're really reaching your hands as if you're trying to touch the corners of the room you're in, raise it out, like I said, 30 to 45 degrees in front of you. And the reason I've put dumbbells down here in Jazzy, because although I think they're great and I love to include them myself, and you can do them on an incline, all sorts, personally, I do feel a preferred alternative for myself anyway is a cable variation. A standard cable side raise, or actually my preferred one that does place a bit more emphasis on the lengthened position, is a behind the back cable side raise. Same sort of thing, scapular plane, so like I said, side raising 30 to 45 degrees in front of you, but that cable position really does allow you to maintain tension throughout and also manipulate to some extent where the majority of tension is lying. It's just a really consistent and comfortable side raise variation that I think is bloody splendid and also very diverse. A lying side raise, so this is a movement I haven't actually seen for years, but I have had it pop up on my Instagram feed quite a lot recently. It's largely because I just don't think it's a particularly amazing side delt movement. So personally, for me, in my personal opinion, I'd probably plop it into the do not go gentle category, because again, when you're lying in that side position and you're trying to raise out to the side, it doesn't really effectively line up with the fibers of the side delt. I just think there are much better alternatives out there. Barbell or dumbbell upright row. I'm kind of torn with this one. I'm probably going to plop it into the iffy category, although it could very much fall into the do not go gentle category, as it's not really a movement I would include myself, and I haven't included it for many years. It does involve the traps a bit more, and it doesn't really do wonders for the side delts, really. It can also put your shoulders in a bit of an unfavourable position. Actually, for that, I probably will plop it into do not go gentle. I've just got to think we do have two great side delt alternatives here, which are probably going to be far more effective and arguably optimal for side delt development. A rope face pull. So this is an interesting one. So obviously we're all familiar with the face pull, where you do this essentially. There are two ways to approach this. For the rear delts, I would actually probably plop it into iffy, because you think about rear delt fibers align at 45 degrees. Therefore, when we do any rear delt work, we want our elbow to be traveling about 45 degrees. Rope face pulls, you're the other way, you're up here. And for that reason, it's not particularly great for the rear delts. But what it is really good for is external rotation and shoulder health. So when I'm doing a lot of pressing in my program, especially when I was powerlifting previously, rope face pulls really did help with my shoulder health, and they were a staple in my program for years on end, to be honest. But so for shoulder health, I'd probably put it up there towards the top, but for rear delt development, which is obviously what we're focusing on here, I'd probably put it as iffy, to be honest. Rear delt flies now. So we're looking at this with the dumbbell. You can do it with the cable as well. It's just any rear delt fly variation, which allows your upper arm to travel at 45 degrees like so, thus better aligning with the fibers of the rear delt. I'm going straight to the source. Fantastic variation, especially on the cable machine. Big fan, because like I said, you can put a bit more emphasis on like different positions, so shorten, lengthen, etc. With the dumbbells, I consider it more of a rear delt swing, as you're probably seeing on screen now, where I'm kind of swinging that arm back at 45 degrees. Although in the picture here, this individual, like the character, is not leaning on any chest support, they're just kind of leaning forward. I personally would use an incline bench to support my chest, thus eliminating any potential variables which could hinder my rear delts reaching failure first. So like my lower back, for example, etc, etc. I would just do a similar variation, but chest supported. So the reverse pec deck fly, you know the pec deck fly machine, the chest, the reverse one where you basically face the pad and you do this, goes straight to the do not go gentle, I think, to be honest, because again, based on the angle of the upper arm being about 90 degrees, it does not really align very well with the rear delts, and it's probably going to place a bit more emphasis on scapular retraction rather than rear delt engagement, to be honest. So for that reason, I'd probably put it down here. And the final one, which is not one I would consider for the anterior side or rear delts at all, is external rotations for the rotator cuffs. And the reason I chucked it in, because I see a lot of people do this as part of their shoulder workout. The reality is, it's not good for any of the muscles we're really looking at today. But with a cable machine, I think it can be okay for the rotator cuffs. So for that reason, I'd probably put it in a moderate tickle, because I do think it has more of a time and a place, but maybe not for what we're looking at today. And arguably, you'd probably say actually the face pulls would probably go as a moderate tickle as well, because again, they have a time and a place, but not necessarily for what we're looking at today. So that is our list. I know what you're thinking, Harry. Well, look, you've only really left us with 5 movements you would probably really consider including. And to be honest, you don't need to do a lot of work for the shoulders. Honestly, a shoulder pressing variation, a side raise variation, and a rear delt fly variation is really all you need to consider doing. You don't really need to do a mass amount for them, because like I said, the anterior delts get heavily worked during any kind of chest movement. The rear delts get quite heavily worked during like pulling movements, especially when doing like an upper back or mid-back row where the arms are traveling at 45 degrees. But doing it wrong, I do think it's definitely worth training them, just maybe not to the extent you would typically train like your chest or your back perhaps. So although we only have 5 movements here, There are so many variations of these movements you could do. You actually have countless movements to choose from. Again, this is based purely on opinion. You don't have to listen to any of it. And as I always say, if you enjoy movement and enjoy what you're doing, I think that's reason enough to do it. But if you want to try and get maybe the most out of your training and you also enjoy these movements as well, perhaps consider mixing and matching some bits and bobs when you're working your shoulders to better enhance your training, get the most bang for your buck. And to be honest, if I look at this for a few more minutes, I probably would mix and match some movements. This is just like a first consideration without overthinking too many things. This is also kind of like a part 1 to the video that's coming next week, in which I will be discussing optimizing shoulder programming, so you know when you could put these movements in, where you could put these movements in, and why you might put these movements in, and also might drop a few bombshells on you that might surprise some of you, but I'm not going to give away too much now. But yeah, to be honest, that is it. That is the video. Obviously, I know there are a lot more shoulder movements out there that I could cover, but I thought it's best to choose like some of the most popular movements and give my opinions on them. None of these movements are bad, and if you want to include any of them, I fully support it and fully back it. You got to do what's best for you. So now it is obviously time for comment question of the week, and this is actually quite an interesting question because it has popped up a few times. Can you do a video on the 531 programs? I'd love to know your thoughts on it. So like the original 531 programs, I don't know if there have been any changes to them since, were essentially developed by Jim Wendler, so Wendler 531, and it's almost like a beginner strength, almost like powerlifting program. I think for a beginner program, he did actually update it later down the line and created Beyond 531, which had a much better approach to the training behind it. As a kind of beginner starting strength program, or like introduction to maybe powerlifting training, or maybe just strength training in general, I don't think it's necessarily a bad program. I do feel like the updates made in Beyond 531 were very much needed, but I think as a whole, I think it's okay. Yeah, and I actually ran Wendler's 531 for must be nearly a year, many moons ago, and I did see great results from it, but I was also quite new to training at the time, so I can't determine whether the great results were due to that program. I do have certain like disagreements with it, like for example a lot of like the earlier 531 stuff was really did lack a lot of accessory work and was almost a bit oversimplified, and also the consideration of like CNS recovery and fatigue, where you were kind of starting with doing such high reps on like the deadlifts for example during your AMRAP sets, and you were just hammering that for months and months until you eventually started going down in the rep range. So I do think there are definitely pros and cons behind it, but I can certainly expand on that in a future video if you want me to. As a whole, my initial thoughts are, I think Wendler's 531, provided that is a 531 you're talking about, is okay. Yeah, that is it. That is the video. Like I said at the start of the video, if you like the video, please let me know you like the video by liking the video. 1,300 likes in the first 24 hours is the goal, so if we could reach that, that'd be bloody splendid. I would very much appreciate it. If you haven't already, please do consider clicking the red button down below to subscribe to the channel, and maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week. And if you two have a question you want me to answer at the end of the next video, please do consider dropping it down below for comment question of the week, and I shall do so. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my dress rehearsal for Little Bo Peep. And thank you for tolerating the video.